yourselves, and what have been some fruitful barriers that your clients have set up for themselves?
Barriers.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on in what way you are curious about barriers?
Yes, both physical in terms of proximity, as well as emotional and transcendental barriers, if there are any.
Answer that?
You want me to answer that?
No.
Yeah. We can both answer.
Let's both answer.
Yeah.
Do you want to go?
Well, I guess for barriers, for me, what I tend to do with the work, it's usually one way, so I'm not taking anything in. So energetic, I'd be sending energy more, or connecting with something beyond myself, and letting spirit work through me. And usually, in the simplest way of answering it just that way, and usually when I'm finish, I usually end up closing by bringing all my energy back into myself. So that's one technique I do. Other things I do is maybe filling my body up with light and maybe creating like this kind of psychic bubble, and using that framework depending on the client and what they're working with. So I don't pick up anything. And there are some times where maybe I would take on something, extracting something, and then expelling it out after. Where they're spitting or, these type of things. So it all depends on the situation, but those would be some of the things that I would do working with people.
So one way that I've worked with barriers before, I really want to empower people that they're in absolute control of their experience. And so I've used things like pillows, blankets, so that a client has actually a literal barrier. Oftentimes I'll have someone, I'll walk even maybe out of a room and have them call me in to really begin to check out where their boundaries are. So I'm not sure if that's some of the area that you were talking about. So I'll take a step closer and closer and closer, and then they check in with themselves and say, can they feel me yet? And is it too much? So they're really in control about how close I get or how far away I stay. And so that's some of the barriers. And in speaking of emotional barriers, I try and encourage clients to go at their own pace. There's wisdom in some of the barriers that we've put up. And so never to push beyond something that one isn't ready for. And to really, really honor if someone has a block or a barrier that's up. If we stand right at the edge of that, what information is there? Not to push through, too fast, but to honor, what our system and our psyche and our emotions have built.
Yeah, and for transference, again, when you talk about barriers emotionally, encounter transference. So usually when I'm working with clients that I know I can work with, it would be transpersonal. So there wouldn't be any personal, emotional bond. Like there is that loving, from that hierarchical position, but it isn't something that I'm getting attached to. And if there is something counter-transferal, then I'll either check in with Nadine or other of my counsel to see if this is something that I can handle. Otherwise, I would say, I can't really work with you moving forward if something comes up in me while I'm working on somebody emotionally. But usually that's not the case, but you never know. So.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes.
Hi. Thank you all so much for bringing this topic and your knowledge and experience to all of us today. I had a question about the work with entheogens within the parameters of the legal systems, and how you guys how you work while maintaining secrecy, or if you work with that. I'm not exactly, yeah.
Okay.
Feel like-
You
yeah.
want to tackle that first?
And maybe what the future of entheogens is going to look like for plant medicines, especially
Yes.
in this country.
So I prefer to use the word privacy versus secrecy. There's such a difference in holding this work sacredly. You're holding this work sacredly. It's very, there's privacy. One of my colleagues who's, also has a psychotherapy background and is a sun dancer and involved in this work, was recently saying how committed he is to bringing this sacred medicine to the world now, and many of his teachers also, and how he's very ready and willing to go to jail if that's what it takes. I guess personally, I feel that this work is done so sacredly and privately that it feels like a calling. I tend to work mostly with people who carry medicine as well. And I work when combining the sexuality and the entheogen, I work with people in such a sacred circle that it's really done out of this world of duality and 3D. It's done in those realms of a sacred circle. So that's how I'll answer.
Yeah, I'll just touch on that a little bit. So there's definitely a medicine community that's out there, so everybody knows how that is, the secrecy and the sacredness about it, that you're not going to be sharing, you're not going to be inviting anybody that's not really in the community. So that's why when we start working with this, because that was more of your question, is we do have a questionnaire on what is somebody's outcomes, what do they want, and what's preventing them, and seeing where they are emotionally and in their ego of what is needed. And that's why we have the questionnaire and we have the contract that they sign, so that for the legalities of things that it keeps us safe doing the work, because it is illegal. And when we have the contract, it's written in a way, and our how is it set up by how many judges and all these things of how it's worded, and how we go about is we're teaching people around sexuality. We're not, otherwise, because the line gets construed between prostitution and this type of thing, right? So when you come from that, I'm teaching you how to be more in your body and these other aspects, then it kind of gets out of the realm of how you're wording it. Just like you said, privacy and secrecy. There's a lot of ways of how you word it for people so that they understand it, of how it is, how the process is going to go about.
And were you speaking a little bit more to the medicine?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So in that realm too, that's something that is not done with everyone by any means. That I would say I don't know what percentage, but that's a very, very sacred work. So that's certainly, that's done when we've worked with someone for a while, and it's a very, very particular, population who would choose to work in that realm. Again, kind of within the community of this work.
Yeah, it's also an integration of that therapy, the somatic therapy aspect of it, to know that someone has the ego structure to be able to do the work. What I realized doing this work is, if you don't have a strong enough ego, there's no point in doing the entheogens, because basically a lot of what the entheogens teach you is to destroy your ego. But if you don't have an ego, what are you going to be destroying? You're just going to be lost in space, and that's not very integrated for the work. So that's why having therapy and these type of things, and then when someone has a strong enough ego, okay, now we need to break that down, and then using the medicine is one way to do that. You can do it other ways too, but from my experience, that's one of the most important pieces of working with entheogens, what it helps.
I don't really know enough about this in the future, but I do hope that our world can accommodate, these sacred plant medicines from the earth safely. You know, I was thinking about this the other day when thinking about tonight, just what a different world it would be if all of us who are here, I'm sure, might think this way, if we were using these sacred medicines from the earth instead of alcohol and cocaine. Just like what a different world we could be living in. And so my deepest hope and desire is that this becomes, you know, a true sacred ritual for humanity, and that we use these wisely. That's my hope for the future.
Yeah, just like Clancy said, it can be abused in the wrong way if not done with healthy boundaries and clarity and all these things. The power dynamics can be overwhelming for some people in that power role, and not really sticking true with the purest essence of what it's about.
I see for the future of it.
Yeah.
I just had a question for you. What you talk pretty generally about medicine. What specific things are you using, and what? How do you determine which ones that you're going to use with people based on what sort of things? And that's my question.
Okay. So when people are shut down sexually, usually with this work, the way I was taught was working with MDMA first, because it's an easier transition into the work, because it's more of an heart opening. It's usually a good experience working with that, and usually it's all internally. So people, you know, their eyes are closed, and then they're asking for whatever they need, and we create the boundaries of what is safe for that person in that moment and sticking to it. So usually how it works is working with MDMA first, then moving on to psilocybin, and later on, for people who want to go even further, working with ketamine. So in that progression, usually. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Great, thank you. And another question here?
This is for either Jay or Clancy. Seems like sort of the two oldest practices we have in humanity is sort of ingesting food or coming across entheogens, or sexual practices. Why do you think it is that these things are having such a hard time coming together, and there's often taboos, so that each one are sort of seeing each other from a distance instead of working together? What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's because they're very powerful, and religion got a lock on sexuality because it's such a powerful force, and you want to master money and sex if you're going to rule the world. So I think that as long as restrictive ideas about sex are present in religion, it's going to come out in everything that touches things that are involved with religion, sacred things that... So it would take some transformation of spirituality to start accepting sexuality for everything to work together. So I think it's all just related to how to keep the horses under the rein of whoever's driving the chariot, and so the stronger forces are going to be the ones that are most harshly controlled.
Another side of it is kind of the foundations of a lot of modern psychology rest on work that Freud did with so-called hysterical women. So these were people who were assigned female at birth and had been raised in that role, and who had a fixation on their father's penis, and had a great degree of anxiety and nervousness, and a real problem with identifying with themselves and their own actions. His case studies really show a lot of this, and a friend of mine put forward, expressed to me a theory that they had read, which expressed, said that perhaps Freud was working with transgender men, actually, and developed a lot of his notions of the shadow based upon the experience of being transgender in a world where that wasn't an option. And so our very like finely tuned notions of what the shadow is could arguably be based largely in the transgender experience. And I think that that's one of the big reasons why alternative genders and sexualities are so terrifying to bring to light even now, given the frameworks that we have for understanding them from a psychological perspective.
Great, thank you. Any other questions?
Hi, I have a question for Jay. My name's Carolyn. First off, I wanted to say thank you for being such a positive and joyful role model for the trans and non-binary community. That's a rare enough thing and like a really great thing to see, so thanks for that. Secondly, I was thinking about hormones in the context of sacred drugs, which was sort of an interesting thought experiment for me. And since you mentioned that you identify as genderqueer, non-binary, rather than simply masculine, I was curious how the experience of starting testosterone has impacted or maybe even deepened your connection with femininity or the divine feminine.
One of the first things that I think of is I never masturbated before I transitioned. I just had no interest in doing that. And the process of becoming more comfortable with my body has involved like this really romantic process of like falling in love with myself and of being really gentle with myself in ways that I never had before. And to be able to effortlessly express a meaningful degree of masculinity, both like personally and interpersonally, has allowed me to be way freer with my expression of my own femininity. I'm a pretty feminine guy, be that in the way that my sentences raise at the end or the way that I try not to interrupt people, try to frame suggestions rather than give commands, and in developing a degree of male privilege, getting preferential treatment in the hierarchy of males that we call patriarchy, has caused me to like really try to use like tactics of communication that are considered feminine in our culture, to help me remain like really conscious and careful of how I'm like treating people and how I'm being treated. And so I've really benefited from like a blossoming of openness to femininity as masculinity has become more accessible to me.
Thank you. Anyone else have questions? Over in the corner.
Hello. Yeah, thanks again for coming up and sharing with us. I had a question for all of you. In your experience, what percentage of people after they've done a major part of this work come away with sort of maybe a consistent practice that they follow through with after they're sort of done with the medicine part of it, or how long does that carry on for? In your experience, like a meditation practice or something along those lines. Maybe it just depends. I don't know.
I'll just say that since I'm attending a church, the people that attend regularly for years, about twice a month or more. So it's not like they're treating people for specific things, but it's a religion or a church, so it's a different context really. But I think that people who have insights into, like in my dissertation study that I interviewed people, and a lot of people came away like changed their whole life from taking ayahuasca. They then had insights into either like sex addiction, or they curtailed that, or they stopped taking medicine that they didn't think was good for them, or they stopped lying to people, whatever was the thing. It has a fundamental way of having people examine their conscience, and when they perceive something that they see that they're doing, it's much easier to change it when you face it head on instead of like running around it all the time. I think just confronting it is the main thing that causes people to change. And I don't know, some people I know have been like drug addicts and then took ayahuasca or something else and were cured for a little while and then went back to it. So it's not always permanent, but I think it's like definitely, from the people that I talk to and in my own experience, it gives you an insight that can really fundamentally change the way that you approach things.
Something that I've noticed amongst my peers, like the young adults, is that an interest in matters beyond the self will draw people to entheogens, and then they'll hear about if you have a regular practice, it makes these experiences much deeper, much easier to integrate, and more meaningful while they're happening. And so then they'll start to get into a practice. And in terms of how often that carries on, I think a lot of it depends on community, as Clancy was saying. I have friends who live in Olympia who have a really great teacher of 5 rhythms, which is a form of conscious dance or movement meditation. And since they meet once a week or twice a week and do this moving meditation, they get like a really great practice as a group, and it's kind of a social space and it's structured for them. And I think a lot of people also will kind of go the other way, like they'll have a practice. Like I started doing yoga with my mom as something that we could do together when I was a teenager, and there was nothing that we could do together. My yoga practice has gotten so much deeper, like kind of thanks to my experiences with entheogens. And similarly, I think that yoga has greatly enriched my experiences in doing journey work. And so I think there's like a little bit of each. And there's been like studies on a larger scale showing that most people have like a greater degree of openness from taking different entheogens and psychedelics. And so that could play into like maybe you go on walks more often, quiet spaces like that.
Again, I think it's relative to depending on each individual, because like what was already said is that someone might see something that they need to, that they weren't aware of before. So it could be a lifelong process of using the medicine. And again, it's the integration piece of you have this experience, this is what you need to do, and doing it. Because knowing what to do and not doing it is not knowing. And so having the people who, like a community that can support you in what you need to do, again, having a medicine community or a dance community or yoga community or anything like that can really keep you accountable on helping people to move through this, because there's a lot of people who go through some hard times and they stop doing it, or they use it to disassociate and not go any further. Or so it all depends on the integration, having a support system, either having a shaman or a guide to guide somebody through their process, or a therapist. These type of things can really help people to integrate what they need. It could be just a couple of sessions and that's all they needed. Or it could be a lifelong thing, like whether someone wants awakening or something, that, okay, it's this long process of integrating, and finally when they get what they want, and then when they reach to that point of whatever they wanted, then they're like, okay, now I want to share that gift and help people get what they want. And that's how it was more for me, the journey of working with entheogens and having somebody who was like keeping me accountable and integrating what I needed to do of body, mind, spirit, community, environment, which spawns to wisdom, love, and creativity, and then coming into beingness. So it's the integration of all those things, not just my body and not just my mind, but spirit, environment, community, beingness, creativity, love, and wisdom. So it takes wisdom and discipline to follow through with all those things. And if we're lacking that and don't have the support, we're never going to get what we want or move to who we really are. So, you want to say anything?
Thank you, Lika. Yes, I was thinking about it, and I'd say almost like at least 100% of people are just so transformed. After someone has really tasted the divine and tasted that sense of oneness, in one way or another, there's some sort of practice, or maybe taking walks, like whatever it is, they try and find that in their everyday life. At least that's what I've experienced. And I also work with most people who already have a practice of some sort, whether it's meditation or yoga. But to me, most people, when you taste the divine, and it's done very intentionally, you want to keep going there. You want to find that oneness. So that's what I've found.
Like the Matrix.
Yeah.
There's no going back. Or whatever.
Thank you. Any more questions?
I'm getting a little depressed because it seems like the big secret is that sex is fun. Sex with psychedelics is even more fun. You're making it sound like work. Can you spark it up a little bit?
Oh, you want me to say? Okay. Well, sex is fun, and sex is amazing, and it's about coming back to innocence and being playful. And that's what it's all about. We've come so rigid and porn and this and it has to be like that. But when it comes back to our truest essence of playfulness and spontaneity and all these things, and getting away with, okay, I need to do this and I need to take marijuana and have sex for 5 hours. Like, it doesn't have to be like that. It can be like that, and that can be amazing too. But again, it's all, what is our intention here? We want to have an amazing sexual animalistic experience. Those things are great. But do I want to have sex with God and experience that? And we can do that either or using with entheogens, and that can be an amazing magical experience. And it's like a buffet. We want to experience all aspects of life. So I definitely resonate with what you're saying. It's about experiencing God through sexuality.
Fun is okay. You don't have to do God.
Yeah, or God, or divinity, I don't know.
Yeah, I think, one thing Alika and I talk about a lot in our workshops and work is coming back to that innocence, that real sense of just play and joy, wonderment and innocence and delight in being in a body. Just that playful innocence.
And, just how to love each other. That's what it comes back to. How do we love each other? We've forgotten how to love each other and how to take care of ourselves and take care of other people in conjunction, like love our neighbor like ourselves. So.
Anybody else?
Hello. You just mentioned something about sex with God, so it brought to my mind a few things. I've been traveling to Mexico to the Mazatec area, practice with mushrooms for the past 14 years. And the recommendation there is that you're not supposed to have sex 7 to 10 days before and after the experience. They always refer to remain pure. At the time, I was like, I couldn't really grasp what was the reasoning. Later on, probably 4 to 5 years after my first experience down there, I asked a psychotherapist, and I also asked the same question to a pranic healing master. The answer from both of them was very similar, how the sexual energy can be transmuted into creative energy or spiritual energy. And when that process happens, the energy just flows up and then gets released instead of being released through the pubic area. What is your take on that? For me, I think the experience has been I can understand the part of the transmutation of energy. So do you think having a sexuality involved with entheogens can limit the spiritual part, or is maybe necessary to have all sexual blockages removed before you can actually progress into the spiritual part?
I think it's definitely, I believe that removing our blockages through our body helps first, and through the entheogens we can do that. We can do that through therapy, we can do that through yoga, we can do that through a bunch of different things. So my experience is about how do we know who we are. Who are you? When we can know who we are and what we want, we don't, one person says we don't do this and we don't do that, but when we're really in touch with who we are and what we really need, we don't need a shaman, we don't need a teacher, we have our inner teacher, but to get there, we need some guidance. So certain rules, I think, around having sex 3 days or 7 days or whatever before and after hold true, because we don't really know who we are. We don't know what's right for us yet. And we can be, the person we're having sex with could be having certain energies to confuse our thinking. And I definitely believe that by moving our blockages through our own practice, we can use both, as they're both tools, just like a knife. You can use it to kill, or you can use it to heal somebody, just like medicine is, or sexuality. And if we can integrate the two, when we're a whole person, we can start to move, even if we're not even a full whole person, with the right intention and moving energy, like what you talked about. You said with men, after having sex, you just lose your energy, but in tantric practices, you don't ejaculate. You hold it in, you move it up to God. And women bring, from lineages, they bring heaven down through their yoni. So when you're having this thing with somebody, you can create this sense of oneness while you're already in a state of expansion with somebody, of creating this circuit and this sense of wu-wei, oneness, non-duality. And I think it's depends on the individual, on where we are on our path. If we're just, it's my first time I'm doing medicine and I want to integrate it with sexuality, probably not the smartest thing to do. So it depends on our level of integration and who we're working with, and their level of where they are on stages. So I don't know, does that answer your question? You want to say?
Yeah. I wanted to speak to an experience I had. I'd been doing many of these tantric practices for a long time, and I would visualize my energy and my chakras opening up, but it wasn't until I actually had an experience with San Pedro where I really experienced it on a much more profound level, and it gave me the body imprint. It's something moved through my heart, so then I was able to run the energy out up into my crown chakra. And for the first time in my life, I really just felt it, like in my body. So from that experience, I had a body memory and experience and imprint of it. So it became more easy for me to experience that like rush of the divine. And in working with some men, similar things happened, they would visualize it, but with the medicine, rather than experiencing the way they'd gone about sexuality or trying to achieve an orgasm, like with this energy, they were able to open and feel the energy just come as like a flow. So they experienced it more of orgasm and sexuality as a passive wave instead. So I think it can help. But if you've practiced a long time. And
well, the thing with the medicine, what it can do for some people, they're so in their head. Well, people in general, some people can be so in their head and not in their body. And by being with the medicine, it can put them in their body so they can feel more sexual. And using that tool to help someone get to a state of orgasm, which would be kind of impossible if it wasn't used. Again, what is the intention and why? What do they want? If they never had an orgasm before, someone's 90 and they're only in their head and never get in their body. That could be a great gateway to help someone to get to that state of what they're wanting to achieve. So, you guys.
I have something to kind of give a bit of depth to these ideas, which is that one of the places I've studied yoga is Ananda, which is a very specific set of beliefs and a very specific practice where they, if you really want to be completely devoted to that path, they have this honor you can take to be a Naya Swami and to wear only blue and to forsake sexuality. And that's a statement of your intent to focus your energy on your own spiritual progress and that of others. Whereas they also in this practice, which is a kind of a householder path for the most part, although there are some monks and swamis, that you can practice what they call conscious conception, where you think of the divine and you bring that in and you try to bring in a really special soul to nurture, and that you can use those different kinds of structures to add more depth to your practice and to make it kind of more inclusive. And so it lets you kind of see how you respond to the framework and learn more about where you're positioned now relative to where you're intending to go.
You also mentioned something about the intertwined figures, changing the subject. There is also, can you talk about maybe the two-spirited and how the shamans or healers in many indigenous traditions are either transgender or transsexual or bisexual or any sort of that?
Yeah, I can address that a bit, and hopefully other folks have something to say. In that, for example, in India, in a lot of areas, there's a gender called Hijra, which is someone who's assigned male at birth, and it's reasonably equivalent to how we would think of a transgender woman, although it's a different category. And those people have a special spiritual role in a lot of areas and a lot of traditions in India. And also in a lot of Native American cultures, people who are, as you said, two-spirit or have other kinds of roles crossing those kinds of boundaries have a really special spiritual role. And I think a lot of it has to do, and my understanding is with this idea of crossing over. So in a lot of traditions, using different substances or like mind-altering processes was reserved for the shaman or spiritual leader, and they would cross over into another realm. It's kind of like my understanding of kind of the heart of that term, shamanic, is to cross over into another realm. And so if you're moving across the duality of gender or across lines of sexuality, you are doing in a very visible way that same work.
In my dissertation on gay and lesbian people using ayahuasca, there was two things that stood out of the way that people reacted to sexuality, which were either that they said that their sexuality had been enhanced by becoming emotionally closer to their partner and being more honest, being more aware of their relationship, or a couple people said that they stopped having sex and then sex became very unimportant to them. And had one subject or participant in the research who was a Native American woman who said that she started to understand the two-spirit concept as a result of taking ayahuasca. And a couple of people said that they started having just a more fluid idea about gender, and that they weren't so strongly in one camp or the other. That it is a fluid thing, just not so obviously in a lot of people, but. There's very few people that are totally masculine or totally feminine. So, and also just thinking about the sexual prescription against having sex, like with ayahuasca, the dietas are famous for some young men going for a year or more without having sex, which is like when they're 18 or whatever, which is apparently very hard for them. But the ideas behind that sort of, it's interesting in this book that we have, the ayahuasca shamanism book, talks about how Westerners perceive the sexual rules as being like that they're going to purify themselves and they're going to be pure by not having sex, whereas the indigenous people are more like, if you have sex with a woman, you're going to smell, and because of that smell, the spirits are going to come and attack you. And it's a totally different idea, but it's very interesting how the northerners who come are perceiving things and interpreting the traditions in their own way according to like Judeo-Christian ideas, whereas they frequently have no idea what the ideas behind it are for the indigenous people. So
we'll probably just take one more question, one or two. Two folks back here, you've been waiting for a while. And then you, Julie.
Okay, so I have two questions. The first one being that, Jay, I really appreciated you kind of explaining how your whole process was very almost like mind-bending and light consciousness exploration. So if you or anybody else has other explorations how sexual play or different types of sexual activity can be used to either hand-in-hand with entheogens or outside of the use of entheogens be used to be kind of exploring our consciousness more. And my other question is for you, Jay, and I'm going to out myself entirely because I've known you for a few years now, as being one of those people who gets really awkward around your pronoun. And I really actually appreciate your playfulness around the non-binary aspects of it. And was curious if you're willing to share, what is your preferred pronoun?
He is very practical and feels nice. They is semantically interesting in that it highlights the fact that I contain a multitude, as do we all. And she is not really preferred, but it's fine in certain contexts, or if that's what like rolls off your tongue. So I don't. He is practical though, so it's sort of, I guess, the reason why the preference falls there. Yeah, thanks for asking.
And in regard to the question about the sexual play, bringing in higher conscious or different consciousness. Anyone?
That was for you, though. It's for me. Yes.
Well. Let's see. Do I have a good tie-in? I don't know if I have a good tie-in for that. The idea of like sexual play. I did kind of want to go back to the question earlier, I guess, to kind of get myself started thinking about how I'd word this, of just, like sex and like mind-altering things for fun, like whippets and shotgunning them. If you're not familiar with this practice, I highly recommend it sometime. So one person inhales the nitrous, and then you like hold your breath, and the other person exhales, and you put your mouths together, and you like breathe it back and forth. Okay. Really fun, really cool. Highly recommend it. It can get really telepathic. And to like bring that same kind of like depth of sharing to a higher place, one of the things that can like really come up is like, for me, maybe like how to navigate my boundaries. I feel really different about my body on different days. Oh my God, I got them in the chuckles. Oh God. And some days I like just feel like an alien in my own skin. Or something that occasionally comes up for me is that I was like kidnapped by aliens, and they like gave me breast implants, which was like a really odd thing for them to do. And so I like, and often these like senses of how I'm relating to my body are really hard for me to pin down. And so thinking about like connecting on a more kind of unitive level can be really helpful for me to understand where I am in relation to the way that I'm inhabiting physical space. And one of the things that's been really healing has been sexual play with myself and also with partners, and learning how to talk more openly around sexuality. And one of the things that often comes up, I think even more so in particular for trans women, is kind of like a feeling of being a lot less desirable, and almost an untouchable, and that like there's a lot underlying that. It comes up for me in conversation with friends sometimes, and I think in particular because I'm this very kind of cute, charming, sort of flirtatious person, and I have that blessing. And so to kind of follow on your question with another one about like what is that intersection of identity and desire, and how do we like be in our bodies, and like how do we think about our bodies. One of the things that has been really helpful for me and for a lot of transgender people I know is like reclaiming the names of body parts. Because like anatomically a clitoris isn't that different from a penis. A prostate isn't that different from a uterus. And so if you have like a concept of your body that doesn't necessarily match with the way that your gender identity is flowing for you, being able to use different words for the parts of your body at different times, or working yourself perhaps as a professional to not intrinsically associate vulva or vagina or yoni with female and woman, but to talk more about like someone whose body was acted on by these hormones, or someone who has these body parts. Because although in 99.999% of the time, and I think that really high numbers do a lot to cultural perceptions and like the weight of what we carry behind us in terms of gender in this culture, that those associations hold true. But if we start to kind of unpack them a little bit, I think a lot more people find, as Clancy mentioned, that they're not 100% on one side or the other. And so sexual play with yourself or with others can really lead to a lot more openness there. And I think one of our tools there is language.
And I want to give a lot of gratitude to ERIE for hosting this panel. And I want to give a lot of gratitude to the panelists for being here, sharing their experiences and work and knowledge and wisdoms in this.